Hello everyone and welcome back. In the last lesson we have introduced a new Ngrx development tool which was Ngrx Store Freeze. Before continuing the implementation of our application, let's now take the time to introduce a second development tool that is going to prove us very useful. It's going to be the Ngrx Router Store package. In order to understand the Router Store package, let's talk about the problem that it solves first. If we switch here to a larger window, we can see here that in our Redux DevTools, we have here this play button, and this is the time traveling debugger. Let's have a look at how this would normally work. If we log in our user to the application, we have set here a new state on the store, and let's do a couple of logouts and logins so that we create multiple transitions in the state of our application. These are currently the only two actions that we have here in our application. We can see here that we have a complete action log, and the DevTools have kept the state that corresponds to each action in memory. So we can now use the time traveling debugger to try to replay all these actions since the beginning of the user session. Let's now try the time traveling debugger. We are going to hit play, and normally this should play here the multiple actions in our application. The problem is currently these development tools are not integrated with the router. So we can see that we are changing the state in the store using the time traveling debugger, but we don't see here the user being redirected to the login page, back to the courses page, like we would expect. In order to make sure that the router also gets triggered as we travel through the timeline, we are going to need to use a new package, the Ngrx Router Store package. This package is going to integrate our development tools with Ngrx Store, and the way that it will do that is to add the state of the router here at the level of the state tree. So we are going to create here a new feature state router that is going to contain all the information necessary for the DevTools to correctly display the right screen to the user as we travel through the timeline. At this point in the course, we have already installed Ngrx Router Store, so that's part of your package.json, so we can go ahead and activate it here in our application root module. Let's go ahead and add here the store router connecting module, and we are going to call here the forRoute function, to which we need to pass in here a configuration object. The only property that we need to define is the state key that we're going to set to router. Router is going to be the name of the router state in our Ngrx state tree. We're going to see it in a moment. Right now, let's first fix another issue, which is related to the serialization of the router state. So if you try this application without any changes, depending on your application, you might crash the Ngrx development tools, or you might run into performance issues. These issues are caused because the router state contains a lot of information. So whenever we try to serialize that information into the DevTools, we might slow them down a lot. But luckily, in order to have working DevTools, there is a good solution for that. We don't want to store all the complete router state. We really only need a couple of things. We need the parameters on the URL, we need the query parameters if there are any, and that's about it. We don't need the whole tree that the router is keeping internally. In order to ensure that we only keep the part of the router state that we need inside the store, we're going to go ahead and configure a custom router state serializer. This will make sure that we only have a small amount of state stored in the store. I would recommend you to install this router state serializer from the very beginning if you are using Ngrx Router Store and if you want to have fully functioning DevTools in your application. Otherwise, the DevTools will simply not work. Let's then take this implementation of a custom serializer that, as we can see, is simply storing the URL router, the parameters of the URL, and the query parameters in the store state. We're going to go ahead and take this serializer class that we will be able to copy here from the documentation. we're going to go ahead and switch here to our application, and we're going to create here a new folder where we are going to be storing this router serializer. Let's create here a directory called shared. We are going to create here a file that we are going to be naming simply utils. And inside it, we are simply going to paste the code that we got from the Ngrx router store documentation. The next thing that we need to do after having here the custom router state serializer, which is this class here, is to head over to the documentation and see how we are going to configure this in our application. What we need here is a custom provider. We need to configure Angular to use our custom serializer at the level of the router in order to serialize the information that the router needs. Let's then take this custom provider. We're going to switch here to our application module, and we are going to add this custom provider here in our root providers. With our custom serializer in place, we are almost ready to try this new integration between the Ngrx DevTools and the router. What we need to add here at the level of our reducers is a reducer for the router state. So as we know now, the store state is going to contain information about the router, so we need a reducer to handle that state. As we have configured here in our application module, the router state is going to be under the router property of the application state tree. Now we need to pass in here to our reducer map a reducer function that is going to take care of all the state under this property. So the router store package comes with a router reducer function that we just need to plug in here in order to have everything working. And with this we have completed the configuration of the router store module, so we are now ready to try out the time traveling debugger of the Ngrx DevTools. Let's refresh the application and log in and log out the user a couple of times in a row so that we create here a series of transitions between the courses screen and the login screen. So now if we try to use the time traveling debugger, this time around everything is going to work as expected. We're going to see that as the actions progress, we are going to see that the screen where we are corresponds to the state modification that we see here. As we can see, we now have a fully functioning time traveling debugger, so we have completed with this the setup of our Ngrx development tools. We have integration with the router, we can replay user actions using the time traveling debugger, and we don't have any performance issues as we are using a custom serializer for the router state. With the DevTools up and running, we are now ready to continue implementing our application. We are going to refactor some of the screens into using the store solution. The first screen that we are going to refactor is the courses list screen. For that, in order to store a collection of entities on the store, we are going to be using a new Ngrx package, Ngrx entity.